The mother might be a lot more complicated than we initially thought. Hi, I'm Will Forge. In this video, I'm gonna review her and talk more specifically about her later on, so that because there are three possibilities I have in mind. The third one will spoil a lot for people who are fans of just the show and have not played the games or read the novels. So I'm gonna put that to the end so that you won't, get spoiled. The really big thing that happened in this episode was what happened with the mother, and this brings me to one of the strengths of the writers that I actually really admire. Even though I didn't like season one especially, that there were a few parts that I did like. One thing that I noticed of, that was in their skill set was that they were able to take the lore from the games and the extended, universe from the novels and stuff, and they were able to implement it in ways that left open multiple avenues that the storyline could go down that were all lore consistent. That they would be like reinterpretations that still worked within the confines of the lore. And in this season, they absolutely maintained that. I was really impressed with the fact that every single time something comes up, there's more than one option. And with the mother, there are three that I have thought of. Two of which will be extremely spoilery for the monster for going into season 3 if you have not played the video games or read the novels. So if you have done that, just stick around. You won't be spoiled by anything. But if you haven't done that, if you're only watching the show, then it's up to you. If you want to be spoiled, stick around. If you don't want to be spoiled, then yeah, hop out. You can listen to number one, but hop out to, right after that. Number one, and this is the one that I like the most, actually. Number one is that she could be if she's in the Gios, and the Gios exists in all of humanity, then the moment they get infected by the flood, she could control every one of them and lock them down so they don't move. But the thing about that one is, let's say she's in all of their minds, and in each of their minds there's a copy of her. They can't coordinate because they can't communicate. That's like copy pasting her entire brain, right? Or not her entire brain, but her personality and her character into the DNA of all the different humans, and then each of them working independently. Like a bunch of computers that are not connected to the internet, they're not communicating. How could she stop them all at one time? So then the only explanation is that they're finally revealing what they've already hinted at throughout the novels and the games, is that humans actually have a soul in the Halo universe, like officially have a soul. See, because in Halo there's something called neural physics, and neural physics is outside of space and time, and your brain is like, our brains are running on it in a way that allows cause and effect to exist in the universe, but allows us to have free will at the same time. And one of the things that is hinted at is that the precursors that created the humans and the Forerunners, unless that turns out to have been a lie that they gave, they told us, the precursors will, they favored humanity. They liked humanity more. And it was implied that they actually, thought that we were more like them, that we were made after their own image, so to speak. And the thing about that is that if we were like them and they were actually masters of neural physics, they could change their form and look different if they wanted to. Their minds were tapped into neural physics in a way that made it to where their consciousness was more powerful than their own physical existence, and they could change form and do all sorts of crazy things. They could remote control and mind control their technology, and they had everything was living things, long stretching I think they called them space bridges or something like that. They're physical bridging, neurons basically connecting across solar systems. It was crazy. But the point is that the humans, that none of that really matters to the main storyline here, except for that the reason they favored them was because of the way they interacted with neural physics and the ancient humans. And so the Forerunners also saw that the humans were, had something unique about them that was different from all of the other species in the galaxy. Humanity, by the way, also was able to be composed into the Promethean Knights, and the reason that they were able to be composed in that way was also supposed to be because of the way that our minds work with neurophysics. And the idea is that humanity directly connects with neurophysics on a way that no one else does. And so potentially there's there's a lot of layered dimensions, like the domain and slip space and all sorts of stuff. It's possible that humanity actually has a layer of existence that is the equivalent of heaven, and potentially one that's like hell. Like, there's no telling for sure until, they explain it all. But because of all the biblical references in the series, them having a soul, in the same vein as a Judeo-Christian religion's, interpretation of the soul, would be very fitting for it. But it's been reinterpreted as a sci-fi element where it's a layer of the laws of physics that is, outside space-time. Anyway, this is really long-winded explanation, but the point is that number one is that if that's the case, and she's an ancient, and she's in the Gios, then that means the Gios isn't containing her. The Gios is tapping into her soul. You know what I mean? Essentially, her soul, the mother's soul, is in the afterlife, or is infected. Is somewhere in the world, but it's probably in the afterlife, and that the Gios is tapping into it, and that she is remote controlling, or like she's able to remotely tap into and communicate into the minds of every single human through the Gios. That's how Quan Ha is hallucinating her. That's how she can communicate to them, and that's how in the first episode she was seen by everyone else around her, right? She was seen by all the other villagers there, and then she couldn't leave the planet because she wasn't real, she wasn't physical. She was walking back toward the planet to stay behind because maybe the Gios has to rely on Forerunner technology, possibly to connections to the domain, and maybe even the domain is where heaven is. Who knows? The point is that if the Forerunner tech inside the planet, where she was hallucinating her the first time, was allowing the Gios to activate and connect to the ancestor through the Gios, through the technology and the Forerunner, structures in the planet, and then into the domain or whatever the afterlife is, wherever humanity is, then she could then communicate with that ancestor, and so could everyone else there. Then later on, she's at the funeral pyre for Vanek, and she hallucinates her again. She says, I am the planet, or whatever. The mother said that she is the planet, or she is Madrigal, or whatever she said. She said she is something. And the idea to me was that they were going to have it to where the Gios was being remote activated, like I just said, by a device in the planet. And maybe in the case, that's the, same case for the planet where, the funeral pyre was. Then she moved over to Onyx, and on Onyx, we know there's a Forerunner structure underneath the ground. We know that we also knew there were Forerunner structures on her homeworld, on Madrigal. But anyway, we know there are Forerunner structures underground on Onyx, and that it's got that whole Forerunner city. We saw that in the season. So if the Forerunner structure in the planet is activating her Gios to remote connect to the spirit of, a dead ancestor, then that would be consistent with everything we've seen. It would also be consistent with, if the planet, they're still on Onyx, if the planet can go through the minds of all of those infected Flood, go activate, those infected humans, go through their minds, go through the Gios, grab this ancestor and pull her basically into them so that she can remote control all of them, then the same soul, the same spirit of the ancestor would be outside of space-time being pulled back in all of these different locations, so she could coordinate, paralyzing all of the Flood in that room, which would mean she very likely, this is my favorite of them because, it means that she basically could have coordinated freezing them all and talking to Quan Ha at the same time. And like I was just saying, this is my favorite one because there's been a lot of lore in Halo that has hinted at the idea that humans have souls and that's different from all of the other creatures, that they might have souls, but they're different. Like, their souls are not capable of tapping into the neural physics in the same way. So while humans, it potentially evolved or were created by the precursors or whatever it is, wherever we came from, whenever we die, we could go on to the domain and live forever. We could go on to somewhere else, maybe not the domain, but somewhere else, and live forever in an eternity, basically. Because of the way that we formulated our whenever we're born, how our neural physics interact with that space, right? No one else can, and so we're, unique in that way, and we should take over the mantle of responsibility. So number one is my favorite, not because I think it's the most likely, but because if this is the direction they're going, then that means that the show is about to confirm something about the lore that the novels have been hinting at and the video games have been hinting at for a long time, and that is that humanity has a soul, and that they, whenever we die, we go on to the afterlife, and that's the reason we're so unique. But there are two other possibilities. And each of them, I think, is more likely than this one because I don't know that they're going to go and reveal that in a TV show. If it is, it's going to make the TV show really worth watching because it's going to reveal something about the original lore as well that they've already hinted at. So I know it's already there. But the second one, number 2, is that a long time ago, the Gravemind, and this is, by the way, where we get into spoiler territory, so if you want to dip, this is it. Go ahead and dip. The Gravemind, that controls all of the Flood. They're on Delta Halo in Halo 2. There was a Gravemind there that had been there since the Forerunner and Flood war. It had broken free recently and was like slowly breaking quarantine because it knew that humanity and the Covenant were out there and that they were finding Halos, and this is the time to start activating. And it knew this because the Alpha Halo, events occurred, and the Gravemind there was starting to be formed, and it sort of got communication from there, remotely. Now, the thing about the Gravemind is that it also connects in with neurophysics and supposedly is an entity that has existed since before time at all. And the implication is that it's essentially like, Lucifer, but it's also, or at least the serpent from the Garden of Eden, which is going to tie into my next video where I'm going to explain some of the connections between the Halo lore and Egyptian mythology as well as Norse mythology and some other stuff. But anyway, the point is that in theory number 2 is that basically a long time ago it infected a Geass, a human that had the Geass in them. So basically, on Delta Halo, there were humans. A lot of the stone structures that we see in Delta Halo were actually built by humans who are worshiping the Forerunner. And the Flood infected all of them, consumed them all, not all of them, but a lot of them. It got quarantined, and of course the Halos were fired, and I'm pretty sure that wiped out the humans that were on that ring. And so basically the Gravemind was a leftover. It had the consciousness of all of those entities in it, right? So it would have those humans that had the Geass already, because the librarian had already de-evolved them and put the Geass onto them, and then she put them onto their Halo rings to try and keep them, to keep them safe from the Flood or whatever, which was all plans that went haywire. The point is that the ancient humans that were consumed by the Flood already had the Geass, so the mother could be inside the Geass, communicating with, inside the Gravemind, and therefore could maybe have wrestled control of these local Flood. She just said local units and basically took control of all of the Flood in this area and froze them for a second, right? And if that happened, the Gravemind is totally going to destroy her mind from within itself, just probably retaliate against her inside himself, which means in the future, just like whenever he had Cortana, in Halo 3, he might use the mother to lead Quan Ha astray, which leads us into the third option. Number 3 is that the Gravemind is actually deceiving Quan Ha. He's the great deceiver. He's existed since before time, and he's a monument to all our sins. So if the Gravemind is sort of remote control, or is sort of remotely accessing her mind, like he did with Master Chief's mind in Halo 3, when he would make you hallucinate, the room would the vision would warp and that green stuff would appear, and you'd move slower, and he'd be speaking to you directly through your mind in a sort of telepathic way. That is actually accessed through neural physics as well, and is the way that the Gravemind actually controls his underlings, the Flood, pure forms, all of that kind of stuff, proto-Graveminds and keyminds that are all extensions of itself. It is one consciousness in neural physics, remote accessing all of these different, bodies all over the place, essentially. It's kind of like a black hole consuming consciousnesses into itself, and the more powerful it becomes, the more it consumes, the stronger its gravitational pull becomes, and it can start sort of remote talking to you even across the galaxy, even whenever you're not infected, and things like that. So the Gravemind becomes more and more powerful over time. This is also how it's able to do the logic plague, is because even machines are just tapping into the laws of neural physics through regular, 3 dimensions and time, through regular space. And so you can still break the consciousness of a machine even if you can't infect it, because all you have to do is start connecting to it on a neural physical level by communicating ideas to the person, and he can actually slowly infect you with the logic plague. That's how that works. It's all consistent. It's not magic. You see what I mean? It's like if I were to be able to warp gravity a little bit, that's me tapping into, some laws of physics. I can then use that to my advantage in a machine. I can create electricity. I can increase heat, decrease heat, and do all sorts of things like that to sort of, increase pressure, like air pressure, and decrease air pressure, and, whatever. Create chemical bonds. I can take advantage of the laws of physics to build machines. Basically, these laws of neural physics, you can actually use them and leverage them against each other and control someone with the logic plague. Or you can infect their body, get into their neural, physics, like go through their body into their consciousness in the neural physical space and infect them directly and take control of them, essentially consuming your soul in, your consciousness and your soul outside of space-time. And so anyway, the point is that number 3 is that he is deceiving you. He's trying to infect you. In this case, Quan Ha, right? He's trying to make her hallucinate this entity the same way you made Master Chief hallucinate Cortana and later his own voice so that he could speak to Master Chief directly. And if this is the case, then, that's, to me, the most likely. Everyone else is jumping on that as well. As far as I can tell, all the other theorist people are jumping on that as a possibility. I still like number 1 more. Number 3 is cool and most likely. The absolute most likely. Number 2 is the least cool and less likely to me. That it's just that the Gravemind has consumed an entity that has the Gias, and therefore the Gias can control the Flood, in which case it could also be using the Flood's ability to remotely cause people hallucinate to make Quan Ha see her specifically. But number 1 to me is the most interesting. I'll put it to you this way. Whenever she grabbed that little ball that was in that like shuffleboard like thing, and she pulled out the ball and it started glowing, and she put it up and it was a star in the star chart and activated like the history of the Forerunner and started rearranging things. That is the way that Master Chief, like in Halo the Flood, the first novel, not the first novel, the novelization of the first game, which was the second novel. Anyway, when Master Chief comes up to a computer terminal, he goes, I'm not sure why, but it's this button, and he just presses it and immediately it works, right? He basically, like, Cortana's like looking at this, like there's a bridge, she's like, maybe we can find a way to extend it. Master Chief takes one look at this computer board that has no like text on it, no translation or anything like that, and he just presses one button, the bridge extends, and she says, how did you do that? And he says, I don't know. Quan Ha and her behavior was not that of someone who had been driven insane by like the logic plague, right? Because like people who have been driven insane by the logic plague behave like the Prophet of Regret did after being infected by by becoming part of one of the Gravemind's tentacles, and like 2401 Penitent Tangent did whenever it was the other tentacle. They sort of like lose the ability to perceive that they're where they are, and they sort of act like they are stuck in a different time in their life, right? They're sitting there like, and they like start to take actions that are not part of their personality. So like when Mendicant Bias got taken over by the the logic plague, he started acting like the Forerunners had betrayed him and all sorts of things like that, right? He's talking to the Gravemind like the Gravemind is actually sort of like perfection, and they need to go back and, include the Forerunners in there and bring them to eternal life, essentially. And like, that's like, it's this insanity of Mendicant Bias to do that. Quan Ha's not doing that. She's not saying, we need to go in here because there is a relic we need to get, right? The logic plague usually is outright making you behave antithesis to your own survival and to the survival of your others, right? She's not acting like that. She's acting in a way that would be positive for humanity. She's reclaiming. She's getting them into a room. She's telling them to leave the moment that it starts to feel off. You know what I mean? Like she perceived with her Gios that we're not supposed to be here, and she ran out, right? So like, why would she be being deceived by the Gravemind? It kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Gravemind also doesn't give you especially, you know, good combat skills through hallucination, but she clearly has the Gios activated because she started fighting better in this season. After the end of last season, whenever she went to those like priestesses or whatever in the desert, and she saw not a Gravemind, not a flood, nothing like that. She saw a monitor rise up out of one of these wells. I've seen people theorize that the wells are like stargates, and maybe they are, and that monitor came from the Alpha Halo, and that was 343 Guilty Spark. But it's also possible it's just a monitor on Madrigal, because Madrigal had Forerunner ruins on it. So it just came up out of a ruin, you know? The point is that, like, it doesn't really make consistent sense for it to be a flood control. I honestly think it's number one. I think they're finally, like, I think it's more likely that they're going to number 3, and that I'm just wrong, and that there are things that they're trying to be all tricksy with, and maybe I'm falling for it or something. But I do think that it's logically inconsistent with it being number 3. And I think number 1 is far more likely, it is far more interesting rather, and far more consistent with what we've seen so far. And if that is the case, if they're going to reveal that humanity have souls and stuff like that, I also think that that's more interesting, because we're going to get to see a Gravemind one way or the other, right? Her being deceived by a Gravemind does not add to the story. Master Chief coming in contact with a Gravemind being formed later on, that's already part of the original storyline, and you know, having her be deceived by one now doesn't add to that. But it would add to the story of Halo in general if they finally did reveal that, yeah, she's actually, you know, that humans have souls, and she's actually communicating with this actual ancestor, because that would mean that the you know, that'd be revealing things that we don't know yet. And yeah, I don't know, it'd just be more interesting that way. I really do think that number 1 would be the coolest, and I think I've made my point well enough now. And this video is probably getting very long, so I probably need to end it here. So I've already filmed that other video, and I got to edit it, and it's just about Egyptian mythology, and it's about, you know, Norse mythology and Hinduism and Buddhism, less Hinduism because I don't know enough about it to make the connections together. But anyway, how they connect in with the Halo lore, and how the Forerunner appear to be these sorts of entities. Like they are the Fae, for example. I don't even think I mentioned that in the video. Their caste systems with the warrior servants and the life workers and stuff like that is the weird court-like behavior of the Fae, where they don't fully understand human courts, but they have their own courts and similar, but like, and they're really rigid, and how they behave is really weird. That's totally based on the Fae of English mythology and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting. That's actually something I didn't even touch on in the other video. So yeah, like and subscribe if you want to see that video, because obviously the season's over, but I'm going to be talking Halo more, and game design and movies and film and stuff like that. I'm going to go back to my genre shift thing and talk more about it in detail and stuff like that. So yeah, just because the season is ending does not mean my videos are ending, and there's more to come. I'll catch you later. Bye.